Imagine pulling a stranger from the water only to discover they hold the key to your entire past. That was Mason's reality until one fateful day changed everything. But this is not just a story of rescue. It's a tale of loss, shocking revelations, and a bond that no one saw coming. How did Mason go from saving a drowning woman to finding his long-lost mother? Find out now in the bustling city of Lagos, where the sun kissed the waters of the lagoon every morning. There lived a man named Mason. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had built everything from nothing. Mason was a billionaire, the owner of one of the biggest real estate companies in Nigeria. People respected him, admired him, and some even envied him. But behind his success was a story that no one knew, a story of pain, loneliness, and a missing piece that had haunted him all his life. Mason had everything money could buy. Expensive cars, a mansion in Lekki, designer clothes, and investments across the country. His office was on the top floor of a glass building in Victoria Island. And every morning his assistant would greet him with a smile and a list of meetings. Business partners wanted his advice. Young entrepreneurs wanted his mentorship, and magazines wanted his story. Yet every night when he returned to his empty house, he felt a strange emptiness inside. He would sit in his living room, surrounded by luxury, and feel like something was missing. He had no family, no mother to call, no father to seek advice from. He had been raised in an orphanage after being found by the roadside as a baby. The matrons at the orphanage had been kind, but they weren't family. The other children had eventually been adopted or moved on with their lives. But Mason had stayed until he was 18. Working odd jobs and saving every kobo until he could start his own business. The only thing he had from his past was a small scar on his left wrist. A mark he had carried since birth, as a child. He used to trace it with his fingers, wondering where it came from. Wondering if somewhere out there, someone knew the answer. The other children at the orphanage used to ask him about it. "Mason, how did you get that scar?" They would say, but he never had an answer. It was just there like a question mark on his skin. A reminder that he came from somewhere. Even if he didn't know where, one sunny afternoon, Mason decided to take a drive along the third Mainland bridge. He had just closed a major deal. A 50 million naira contract to build a housing estate in Abuja. But instead of feeling excited, he felt that familiar emptiness. The cool breeze from the lagoon always helped him think. So he rolled down his windows and drove slowly, watching the water sparkle under the afternoon sun as he drove. He noticed a small crowd gathering near the edge of the bridge. Some people were shouting, pointing toward the water. Mason slowed down and looked closer. His heart skipped a beat when he saw a woman struggling in the water below. Her arms flailing desperately as she tried to stay afloat, without thinking twice. Mason parked his car and rushed toward the bridge railing. "Someone help her!" A woman in the crowd screamed, her voice filled with panic, but no one moved. They all stood there, watching, too afraid to jump into the fast-moving water. Some were recording with their phones. Others were just staring in shock. Mason didn't hesitate. He kicked off his Italian leather shoes, pulled off his designer jacket, and climbed over the railing. "Oga, are you crazy? You'll die!" Someone shouted, grabbing his arm. Mason shook him off. "If I don't try, she will definitely die," he said firmly. And before anyone could stop him, he dove into the water. The cold water hit him like 1,000 needles. Shocking his system, the current was stronger than he expected, pulling him sideways, but he pushed forward, swimming as fast as he could toward the drowning woman. She was sinking, her head going under the water. Her arms no longer fighting. Mason reached her just in time, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. She coughed violently, water spilling from her mouth. Gasping for air, "Hold on to me!" Mason shouted over the sound of the rushing water, wrapping his arm around her waist. The current was strong, pulling them both downward. And for a moment Mason wondered if they would both drown. But he refused to give up. He kicked harder, using every ounce of strength he had. Fighting against the water that wanted to drag them under, it felt like forever. But finally, Mason managed to swim toward the shore where some fishermen were waiting. They had seen what happened and had run down to help. They pulled both of them out of the water, laying the woman on the ground. She was unconscious, her lips pale, her body limp. Mason knelt beside her, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Water dripped from his hair, his shirt clung to his body, and his lungs burned. "Is she breathing?" One of the fishermen asked, his face filled with worry. Mason checked her pulse. It was faint, but it was there. "Call an ambulance," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Now!" Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Paramedics arrived, lifted the woman onto a stretcher, and rushed her into the ambulance. Mason climbed in after her, refusing to leave her side. "Sir, are you family?" one of the paramedics asked. Mason shook his head. "No, but I'm not leaving her alone." The paramedic nodded and let him stay as the ambulance sped toward the hospital. Mason stared at the woman's face. She looked to be in her late 50s. With gray streaks in her wet hair and deep lines on her forehead, her clothes were old and worn. And she looked like someone who had been through a lot of pain. There was something about her. Something familiar, but Mason couldn't place it. He had never seen her before, yet he felt drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. At the hospital, the doctors worked quickly to stabilize her. Nurses rushed in and out of the emergency room, and Mason could hear the beeping of machines, the urgent voices of the medical staff. He sat in the waiting room, his clothes still dripping wet, his mind racing. Why did he feel so connected to this stranger? Why couldn't he just leave and go home? His phone kept ringing, his assistant calling, his business partners calling. But he ignored everything. Nothing else seemed to matter. Hours passed before a doctor finally came out, pulling off his gloves and looking tired. "She's stable now," the doctor said, his voice calm. "She's very lucky you got to her when you did. A few more seconds and she would have drowned. Her lungs were filled with water, and her heart had almost stopped." Mason nodded, relief washing over him like a wave. "Can I see her?" he asked. The doctor hesitated, looking at Mason's wet clothes and concerned expression. "Are you family?" he asked again. Mason paused. "No. But I'm the one who saved her, please. I just want to make sure she's okay." The doctor sighed and nodded. "She's still unconscious, but you can sit with her for a while. Room 204. Mason walked down the hospital corridor, his wet shoes squeaking against the tile floor. He pushed open the door to room 204 and stepped inside. The woman lay on the bed, her face peaceful now, her breathing steady. And 4 drip was attached to her arm, and a monitor beeped softly beside her. Mason sat down in the chair beside her and watched her quietly. Her face looked so tired, so worn by life. He wondered what had driven her to jump. What kind of pain had she been carrying? For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't want to leave. He felt like he needed to be there when she woke up. Hours turned into a full day. Mason stayed by her side, ignoring calls from his office, his business partners, his assistant Frankie who kept texting him asking where he was. Nothing else mattered in that moment. He ordered food from the hospital canteen, barely ate, and kept his eyes on the woman. Waiting, finally, late in the evening, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the light. Her gaze moved around the room, the white walls, the machines, the 4 in her arm, until it landed on Mason. For a moment she just stared at him, confusion in her eyes. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "You're in the hospital," Mason said gently, leaning forward. "You were drowning. I pulled you out of the water." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she turned her face away. "You saved me?" Her voice cracked with emotion. Mason nodded. "Yes." She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why did you save me?" "I didn't want to be saved." Mason felt his heart tighten. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said softly. "Whatever you're going through, it's not worth throwing your life away." The woman turned to look at him again, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she said, her voice filled with pain. "I have nothing. No family, no home, no reason to live. My life is a burden." Mason shook his head. "Your life matters, it matters to me. I don't even know you, but I couldn't let you drown. And I'm glad I didn't." The woman stared at him for a long moment, studying his face, then her eyes drifted down to Mason's hands, which were resting on the edge of the bed. Her expression changed, her eyes widened, and her breath caught in her throat. "Your wrist," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. Mason looked down at his left wrist, where the small scar had always been. "What about it?" he asked, confused. The woman sat up slowly, ignoring the pain in her body, her hands shaking. "That scar. Where did you get it?" Mason frowned. "I've had it since I was born. I don't know where it came from, why." The woman's face went pale. Her whole body began to tremble, and tears began streaming down her cheeks faster now. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It can't be. It's not possible." Mason leaned forward, now genuinely concerned. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call the doctor?" But the woman wasn't listening. She reached out with a shaking hand and gently touched Mason's wrist, tracing the scar with her finger as if she was touching something sacred. Her touch was soft, reverent, and full of disbelief. "My son had a scar exactly like this," she said, her voice breaking with every word. "On his left wrist, he was born with it. The midwife said it was a birthmark, a sign that he would be special." Mason's heart began to race. His mind went blank for a moment. "Your son?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded, tears pouring down her face now, her chest heaving with sobs. "He was taken from me 20 years ago," she said, her voice thick with grief. "We were caught in a terrible flood in our village. The water came so fast, so strong, I was holding him in my arms, trying to keep his head above the water. But the current was too powerful. Someone I don't know who grabbed him from my arms and ran. I screamed. I tried to follow, but the water swept me away. When I finally made it to safety, he was gone. I searched for him everywhere, every orphanage, every police station, every church. I showed people his picture. I described the scar on his wrist. But no one had seen him. They all told me the same thing. Your son is dead, let him go. But I couldn't. I couldn't let him go." Mason felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. His mind was spinning, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. "What was your son's name?" he asked quietly, his voice shaking. The woman looked at him with so much pain in her eyes, it was almost unbearable to see. "I named him Chima," she said softly. "It means God knows in Igbo. I named him that because, even though I didn't know what the future held, I believed God would protect him. I believed God knew where he was. Even when I didn't." Mason's hands began to tremble. His throat felt tight, and he could barely get the words out. "Ma'am, what's your name?" he asked. "Amelia," she said softly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "My name is Amelia." Mason stood up, his legs feeling weak, his chest tight, his breathing shallow. He looked at the scar on his wrist, then back at Amelia. "I was found by the roadside as a baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I grew up in an orphanage in Sorler. I never knew my parents. I never knew where I came from. The only thing I had was this scar." He held up his wrist, his hand shaking. "And I've always wondered where I came from. I've always felt like a part of me was missing." Amelia let out a sob and covered her mouth with her hands. "It's you," she cried, her voice breaking. "You're my son. You're my Chima." Mason's eyes filled with tears. "How do you know?" he asked desperately. "How can you be sure? What if it's just a coincidence?" Amelia reached out and pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly as if she would never let go again. "A mother knows her child," she whispered, her voice filled with absolute certainty. I've carried your face in my heart for 20 years. I would recognize you anywhere. You have your father's eyes, his strong jaw. And this scar. She touched his wrist again. This scar is the proof. God has answered my prayers, my son is alive. Mason broke down completely. He wrapped his arms around her and buried his face in her shoulder. Sobbing like a child, all the years of loneliness. All the questions, all the emptiness, it all came pouring out in that moment. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. He felt like he had finally come home. They cried together for what felt like hours, holding on to each other as if letting go would make it all disappear. As if it was all just a dream, when they finally pulled apart. Both of their faces were wet with tears, their eyes red and swollen. Amelia cupped Mason's face in her hands, looking at him as if she was seeing a miracle. I thought I lost you forever, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I thought you were dead. I've been living with that pain every single day for 20 years. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I saw a child your age, I would think of you and wonder if you were alive somewhere. If you were happy, if you were safe. Mason shook his head, tears still streaming down his face. I'm here, Mama, he said, the word feeling both strange and perfectly natural on his lips. I'm here. Hearing him call her Mama made Amelia cry even harder, her body shaking with emotion. I'm so sorry, she said desperately. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry I let them take you. I should have held on tighter. I should have. Mason held her hands tightly, stopping her. It's not your fault, he said firmly, looking into her eyes. None of this is your fault. You did everything you could. And look, we found each other. Against all odds, we found each other. That's a miracle, Mama. That's God's work. Over the next few days, Mason stayed by Amelia's side as she recovered in the hospital. He paid for a private room, made sure she had the best doctors, the best food, everything she needed. They talked for hours and hours, filling in the gaps of 20 years. Amelia told him about the flood, how she had been living in a small village called Oguda when the disaster struck. It was supposed to be a normal day. She was cooking soup. Mason's father Obi was fixing the roof, and baby Chima was sleeping peacefully in his crib. Then the rains came, heavier than anyone had ever seen. Within an hour, the river broke its banks and water rushed through the village like an angry monster. She told him how she had grabbed him and run, how his father had tried to save them both, but had been swept away by the current. She told him how she had searched for him every single day after that, going to orphanages all over the country, talking to police officers, priests, anyone who would listen. But she never found him. She told him how she eventually moved to Lagos, working as a cleaner in schools and offices, living in a single room in Ajegunle, struggling to survive, always hoping that one day somehow her son would come back to her. Mason told her about his life in the orphanage, how he had been given the name Mason by the matron because he was found near a construction site. He told her about the years of feeling alone, of watching other children get adopted while he remained behind. He told her about working as a bus conductor at 16, saving every naira, sleeping in the bus garage some nights. He told her about starting his first business, a small provision store, and how it grew into a property business, then into the empire he had now. He told her about the years of working hard to build something for himself, of becoming successful but never feeling truly happy because something was always missing. I used to look at families, Mason said quietly, and wonder what it felt like to belong to someone. I would see mothers with their children and feel this ache in my chest. Now I finally understand what it was. It was you, Mama. It was always you. When Amelia was finally discharged from the hospital, Mason took her to his mansion in Lekki. As they drove through the electronic gates and she saw the beautiful house, 2 stories tall, painted white with big windows, flowers everywhere, a fountain in the front yard. Amelia couldn't believe her eyes. She covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face again. You live here? She asked in complete shock, her voice trembling. Mason smiled warmly. We live here, Mama. This is your home now. This is our home. Amelia shook her head in disbelief. I don't deserve this. I'm just a poor woman who used to clean toilets. I don't know how to live like this. Mason gently wiped her tears with his handkerchief. You deserve everything good in this world, he said firmly. You're my mother. Everything I have is yours. Everything I've built, I built because you gave me life. None of this would exist without you. Mason showed Amelia to a beautiful room he had quickly prepared for her with the help of his housekeeper. Alice, the room was painted a soft lavender color, with white curtains that moved gently in the breeze from the window. There was a large bed with clean white sheets, a closet that Alice had filled with new clothes in Amelia's size, a dressing table with a mirror, and a private bathroom with a bathtub. Amelia stood in the middle of the room, slowly turning around, taking it all in, completely overwhelmed. This is too much, she whispered, her hands trembling. It's not enough, Mason said firmly, his voice filled with emotion. It will never be enough to make up for the 20 years we lost, but it's a start. I want to give you the life you should have had all these years. I want you to be happy, Mama. I want you to finally rest over the next few weeks. Mason introduced Amelia to his world, and slowly, carefully she began to adjust. He took her shopping at the big malls in Lagos, Palms, Ikaya City Mall, and watched her face light up like a child's as she looked at all the clothes. The shoes, the jewelry. He bought her everything she needed and more. Ignoring her protests that it was too much, he hired a doctor to come check on her regularly. Making sure she was healthy, he introduced her to Alice, who became like a sister to her, teaching her how to use the washing machine, the microwave, the television remote, but more than all the material things. Mason gave Amelia something far more valuable. His time, his love, and his presence every morning. They had breakfast together on the balcony overlooking the garden. Every evening, they sat in the living room and talked, sharing stories, laughing, sometimes crying. Mason even started learning Igbo from her so he could speak his mother's language properly, Keju Kajimir. Mason would say, practicing the phrase for how are you. Amelia would laugh at his pronunciation, her eyes sparkling with joy. Shima, you're speaking through your nose. Say it from your chest. Kedu Kajimir. Mason would try again, exaggerating the sounds. And they would both end up laughing. You're a stubborn one, Amelia would say. Still laughing, wiping tears from her eyes. I wonder where you got that from, Mason would reply with a knowing grin. And Amelia would playfully hit his arm. These were the moments Mason treasured most. Not the business deals, not the money, but these simple, precious moments with his mother. One evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, Amelia turned to Mason with a serious expression that made his smile fade. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mason put down the newspaper he'd been reading and turned to face her fully. What is it, Mama? Amelia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I need to find peace with what happened, she said, her voice steady but filled with old pain. I need to go back to Oguda, to the village where it all began. I need to visit your father's grave. I need to properly say goodbye. Mason felt his chest tighten. My father? He said quietly. Amelia nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. Obi, your father's name was Obi. He died in the same flood that took you from me. He was trying to save us both. He had you in one arm and was pulling me with the other. But the water was too strong. A tree hit him, and he went under. I never saw him again. Her voice broke completely. I've never been able to properly mourn him because I was too busy searching for you. Every moment was spent looking, hoping, praying. But now that I found you, now that this part of my heart is healed, I need to heal the other part. I need to say goodbye to him properly. Mason felt a lump in his throat. He had a father who had died trying to save him. Then we'll go together, he said firmly, taking her hand. You don't have to face it alone. I want to meet him too. even if it's just at his grave. I want to thank him for giving me life, for trying to save me. A few days later, Mason and Amelia traveled to Oguta in Imo State. Mason drove his Land Cruiser, and the journey took several hours. As they left the busy streets of Lagos behind and drove through smaller towns and villages, Amelia became quieter and quieter. She stared out the window, watching the landscape change, lost in memories. When they finally arrived at the village, it looked different from what Amelia remembered, rebuilt after the flood. With new houses, paved roads, and a fresh coat of hope, but still carrying the scars of that terrible day. Amelia led Mason through the village, past houses where she used to know the families, past the small church where she and Obi had gotten married, past the market where she used to buy vegetables. Finally, they reached a small cemetery on the edge of the village, shaded by large trees. Amelia walked slowly toward a simple grave with a wooden cross that had weathered over the years. The inscription was fading but still readable. Obi Okafor, beloved husband and father. Gone but never forgotten. This is your father, Amelia said softly, her voice breaking. His name was Obi Okafor. He was a good man, the best man I ever knew. He was a fisherman, strong and hardworking. He would wake up before dawn every morning and go to the river. He loved you so much, Chima. Even before you were born, he would talk to my belly, telling you stories, singing to you. When you were born, and he saw that scar on your wrist, he said it meant you were destined for great things. He would have been so proud of the man you've become. Mason knelt down slowly and touched the grave, his fingers tracing the carved letters of his father's name. I wish I had known him, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I wish I could have heard his voice, felt his hand on my shoulder, heard him call me son. Amelia placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. You carry his strength, she said gently. Every time I look at you, I see him. You have his determination, his kind heart, his stubbornness. She laughed softly through her tears. He would always say, Amelia, if I start something, I finish it. That's exactly how you are. You built an empire from nothing. That's your father's spirit in you. They spent the rest of the day in the village. Amelia took Mason to the river where the flood had happened. It was calm now, peaceful, with children playing by the banks and women washing clothes. It was hard to imagine that this gentle river had once been a raging monster. Amelia told him more stories of their life before the flood. How happy they had been in their small house. How his father would come home, smelling of fish and river water. How they would sit outside in the evenings watching the sunset, dreaming of the future they wanted to give their son. We didn't have much money, Amelia said, sitting on a rock by the river. But we had love, we had each other. And we had dreams for you, Chima. We wanted to send you to school, to give you opportunities we never had. Your father used to say, our son will not be a fisherman. He will wear a suit and work in an office. And look at you now. She turned to Mason with pride shining in her eyes. He got his wish. You became everything we hoped for and more. When they returned to Lagos, Mason made a decision that would change many lives. He wanted to do something meaningful with his success. Something that would honor both his mother and his father. Something that would help others who had suffered like they had. He called a press conference and announced the creation of the Obi and Amelia Foundation, dedicated to helping orphans, street children, and families affected by natural disasters. As time went on, Mason and Amelia became inseparable. They traveled together, visiting the foundation's shelters in different states, meeting the children, hearing their stories. They worked together, with Amelia offering wisdom and emotional support while Mason handled the business side. And they healed together, slowly closing the wounds that 20 years of separation had left. 1 year after their reunion, on the anniversary of the day, Mason saved Amelia from the river. They held a special celebration at the foundation. All the children gathered, along with volunteers, donors, and families who had been helped by the foundation. Mason and Amelia never forgot where they came from, despite his wealth and success. Mason remained humble, kind, and generous. He still remembered what it felt like to be hungry, to be alone, to feel like nobody cared. And because he remembered, he never stopped caring about others. Amelia, who had once cleaned toilets and lived in a single room, now lived in a mansion but never acted like she was better than anyone. She treated the housekeeper Alice like a sister, the security guards like family, and the children at the foundation like they were all her own. Together, they built a legacy, not of money or power, but of love, forgiveness, and second chances. This story teaches us that life can take unexpected turns. And no matter how tough things get, kindness, perseverance, and faith will always shine through. And sometimes, the people we're meant to find are the ones we save along the way. It shows us that our struggles have purpose, our pain has meaning, and our story isn't over until God says it's over. To my amazing audience, what did you learn from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a thumbs up to let me know.